So first of all, I would just like to share my deepest wishes, my best wishes with you, and hope that you're doing well in with everything that is going on right now. It's been crazier and crazier the past few weeks of the past few months. And yeah, I just hope you're doing well emotionally, physically, mentally, any which way whatsoever. And secondly, I would like to thank you on behalf of the entire theater arts department at UCSC for letting us talk to you today. We were actually really excited for having the alumni weekend project that we had planned, but unfortunately that was also canceled. But yeah, one step at a time, here we are. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. I was very much looking forward to the event itself as well. So I've always been interested in going back and like talking to the students, particularly because when I was a student, I don't recall having alumni come through to talk to us.
Yeah.
So I am a firm believer that hearing firsthand experiences from alumni is actually just as valuable as curricula.
For sure. Yeah.
Anyhow.
Yeah. That's why we just like started off with it recently, and it was like we found it important that we needed an alumni presence for the students. Yeah, definitely. All right, let me just begin by a very basic, very simple question. Of all the possible choices that you must have had for choosing an undergraduate education, what made you come to UCSC?
Okay, this is this is a funny story. Well, in a way, I think it's a funny story. So my first choice was not UCSC.
Okay.
I have moved back. So I grew up in Hollywood, California. Mm-hmm. And then in high school, my parents decided to move to Texas.
Okay.
And I ended up in a small, tiny town in Texas. After graduation, I moved back to California, and my goal was to go to UCLA.
Right.
So I took a year off in between, tried to get myself resettled back into the state, so I could have in-state address and all that stuff. And then I applied with UCLA being my first choice, Berkeley my second, and my cousin was going to UC Santa Cruz at the time, and she said, you should consider Santa Cruz. I really like it. It's beautiful. I'm having a good time here. So I came up to visit her at the university that year before, and it was gorgeous. So I put it down as my third choice. And so then Berkeley rejected me, and UCLA said that I could go through the audition process for their theater arts department. And UC Santa Cruz accepted me on all regards. So I spoke to her more about it, and she more or less convinced me to go. So I said, okay, I'll go check it out. I'll try it out at least for my freshman year and see what I feel and what I think. And if not, then I will reconsider. So that's really how I ended up at UC Santa Cruz. I didn't pursue UCLA, even though that was my dream, was to go to UCLA. And now, in hindsight, I'm actually very glad I didn't go to UCLA. Nothing against them. Per se, it's a great university. However, things that I got at UC Santa Cruz, I know I definitely would have not received in LA. So, but it also took about a year and a half for me to settle into UC Santa Cruz.
Right.
As well. Like I almost did leave it. I started doing all the paperwork to transfer. And at the midnight hour, I canceled my transfer. Yeah. So anyhow.
Yeah, we're glad you stayed.
Me too.
So yeah, at UCSC, you studied theater arts, and from there, you went on and founded the David Herrera Performance Company, which, by the way, congratulations on. I've checked out your website, and it looks, I mean, the work you've done looks really amazing over the past decade. It's really mesmerizing. But yeah, the David Herrera Performance Company, for whoever's watching this right now, is a performance company grounded in theater, dance, movement, equity, and mainly about equity and inclusion of Latinx communities. My question here to you is, what was your inspiration or like your thought process behind finding this kind of a performance company? And just for whoever's watching it, how do the various aspects of a production, like the location or the theme, or it's like the various parts of a dance performance, how do they work at your company?
Okay, that's a lot of questions in one question. Okay, so I'll answer the first one first and see if we can go from there. Which was what what inspired me to do this. So even while I was at university, I kept noticing how most of the people in my dance curricula, and even theater arts, because I did a lot of acting while I was there too. I did a lot of main stage productions and things like that. But I kept noticing how the majority of the people were predominantly white.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I was lucky enough to be casted in many productions when I was at the university, there was this longing and the sense to see more people of color, and in particularly to have a camaraderie with people of color in regards to the experiences that we go through, mm-hmm. that I wasn't necessarily seeing represented. And I don't necessarily think, it didn't occur to me then that it could have been systemic. It didn't occur to me then that there was a big issue, but it kept coming up. I do remember one year we did, Kathy Foley directed Twilight LA, and I was casted in that. And I played a couple different characters, but one of them happened to be a Latino character. And it was the first time that I was just like, oh, I could kind of relate to this. Right. Because of my background, and I grew up in LA, and I was in LA when the riots happened, the Rodney King situation and all that. Mm-hmm. So it was one of the first times that I actually felt like I was being asked to bring some of my background and history into a piece of work. Granted, I had a hard time, I think, playing that role because I also have never been asked to do that. Right. And in the dance department, it just kept coming up over and over. I mean, most of our dance department at the time was only strictly modern based, and that is what I love. But I kept thinking, this is lacking in so many aspects, and I didn't quite know then why it was a problem. Fast forward, when I moved away and finally decided to create a company, I knew I wanted to create a company that looked into equity practice as a real practice. And it wasn't easy. I mean, I still consider myself in the journey of that, mm-hmm. of that practice. I don't think it's ever going to stop being a journey. Sure. You live and you learn. And but that was the impetus to start a company that was specific to creating work that spoke to the Latinx diaspora living in the United States. And there's so many versions of what that means. And so that's really what instigated the whole company. And also because, professionally, again, I kept going to, I see tons of dance productions and performances, and the majority are white-led, oriented in ballet and modern, or what we consider styles that are pillars in the community, but really they have a very specific heritage once you start to look into them. Right. They're a very white heritage, if I want to be blunt. And so I kept thinking, well, I love modern dance. I'm going to do this. I'm going to continue using modern dance, but I'm also going to question it. while I'm doing it. So it's what I've been doing for, God, over 20 years at this point. Okay, so that's that. And then what was the second part of your question?
Yeah, the second part was basically asking how the various parts of production worked at your company. How would you decide on a theme or on a location or like on casting? How does all of that work?
Well, that has changed a lot, quite a bit in the time frame that we've been in existence. So I will admit that at the beginning I committed a lot of mistakes, meaning I followed the same structures I learned without recognizing that a lot of those power structures were very were centered in supremacy practice.
Right.
So so slowly and surely I started to decolonize my practice, started to decolonize my aesthetics and the way I worked even with other artists and collaborators. So so I'll speak to what I'm doing most currently, as opposed to everything that, you know, because that's a long conversation. But so most currently what I do now is, I usually seek out people through other people, or through work that or people that I see, whose work I see in the community. With my casting, I'm pretty open about what I need nowadays. I do say, like, for instance, in my last audition, I did say that I'm interested in POCs, I'm interested in Latinx, I'm interested in queer identified, LGBT identified individuals. I mentioned I wanted people who were bilingual and multilingual, or who had immigrant backgrounds. And I put that out in my actual notice, because that is what I want. Where before I used to have more of like looking for male and female dancers of any background or ethnicity, and it was very, you know, very neutral. But the more I do this, the more I realize, like, no, I'm gonna ask for what I need and for who I want to be involved. And once I bring somebody into the project, if it's a cast member, honestly, I want them to work in the concept that I have, but through their own experience. So I'm not putting something on them. They're actually informing me of how they have experienced this idea or this theme.
Right.
And even the movement that we generate comes from them. So it's a very organic process where I give them prompts and questions, and they really answer it through movement and through conversation. And that's how the narrative for the work evolves. And I do the same thing with my designers and collaborators. I now ask them, you're not just here to create, to make a design element. I want your history involved. And if you don't feel like you can relate, then let's find a way for you to relate. So for instance, my composer last year's project decided to create the musical score by talking to the dancers. So they had individual conversations on their own.
Right.
And he took their stories and whatever they shared with him and created the music out of that idea. And so it was less about me, it was less about him. It was very decentralized. It was a very decentralized way to look at work and what I think is true collaboration. Right. So there's ownership everywhere.
Right.
And I do believe that's very powerful. I think it's important to give ownership to everybody that's involved. You know, it might be my name on the company, but I now say that it's not all my work.
Of course.
You know, even when it comes to like writing and pamphlets and things like that, choreography by, I usually write cast and David Herrera.
Right.
Because I'm trying to push away from those old structures where only one person is given credit, because I find that that's very untrue. And, you know, being in this field for such a long time, and also seeing how other people work, it's always bothered me when I know a choreographer did not create everything. You know, I'm like, your company created at least 50% of this work and you're taking full credit.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we were taught that, and it was passed on to us as the way to do it. Anyhow,
Yeah.
so that's what we do now is a lot of that work. Um, and I'm very open about it with cast members or potential cast members. I say, if this is not something that you're interested in, then I'm completely okay with that. Or if you are, come on in. But if you find a situation that it's not clicking for you during the process, speak up and say it out loud, and let's have a conversation about it.
To know that you've gone on to do all this for the purpose of inclusion, like finding out the problems and faults present in the system and trying to fight it, it's commendable. It's really commendable. Yeah.
Thanks. I try, but like I said, it hasn't been easy. There's been a lot of mistakes along the way, but it was I do now recognize it was because I was trying to emulate a structure that I was presented with through my training and through what I was seeing with other organizations. You know, you see companies that you love and you see how they work, and so you try to emulate that and copy that,
Mm-hmm.
not recognizing the hidden dangers that can have to
Right.
particularly minority people, cultures, who are usually left out of the bigger pictures and from grand scale productions.
For sure. I believe cultures are like the roots and background of where someone comes from. It's like it makes them in a way. How much does expression and articulation of a person depend specifically on the culture? Or to rephrase that, how does culture influence dancing styles and movements?
Okay, this is a great question. And I feel like this could be a whole conversation on its own.
Right.
So here's the thing. I now firmly believe that all movement is cultural.
Okay.
Including things like ballet and modern dance, who have been passed as neutral, but they're not. They're rooted in a specific culture, and I'm just gonna say predominantly white culture.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, we did a production here in San Francisco at the Asian Art Museum with a cohort called Dance Around Race, and it involved Jared Cassell, who's actually faculty at UC Santa Cruz, Yayo Kembar, Risa Simpson, Samay Dison, and we didn't necessarily have a prompt, but the idea was to have a response to the structures we are to non-equitable structures.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did a piece I would have probably never done in even 4 or 5 years ago. I did a solo on myself. And I should say, it's been 10 years since I've actually done a performance myself. So I did a solo on myself. And the reason I decided to take on that was because I thought, okay, what is the movement style in my body that is not related to my training? What came through me through community? What came through me through culture and heritage? And that was really powerful to dive into, because I recognized quickly in that process how much I had pushed aside my own cultural and heritage, the way that my movement was associated to culture. I pushed it aside for modern dance,
Right.
so that I could be considered professional.
For sure.
And then around that, I also thought, well, I don't want to structure it in a way that looks like I'm performing. I'm going to do it the way I would have normally done it within the environment that it's live in. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, okay, so I'm going to dance the way I would dance, like if I went to a family gathering or a wedding or a cultural event where we're just where we're having fun, where we're enjoying each other, and we're just moving to the beat of the community.
Right.
And I have to tell you, it was extremely liberating. So I do ask everybody, I do ask now people to consider, how do you move when you're not thinking of technique. What do you do? And most of us have this in one form or another. You know, another aspect that I used was outside of like my Mexican, I did what we call zapateada in Mexican culture. So that was one part of the presentation. The other part was what I do when I go clubbing. You know, when I go out to the bars, how do I dance when I'm just enjoying myself and I'm not thinking about performance?
Right.
You know, sometimes this idea of getting stuck in the performative quality of something makes us disassociate from our whole selves.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't speak for everyone, but I can speak for myself that I definitely did that. I definitely kept this in the background for all these years. And then I put it all of a sudden I put it up front, and I did not care. I said, I'm not going to care what everybody has to say necessarily. I'm just going to live it out. And I have to tell you, the response to that was tremendous. I was not expecting the kind of response that I got from it. And it kind of assured me that I was definitely moving in the right direction. I also asked my cast members the same thing, like, anything that you have within your body, bring it out. It doesn't necessarily have to look like this.
Mm-hmm.
It's like modern movement, as we quote unquote modern dance movement. Just bring it out. If it makes sense to you and it's real to you and it's organic to you, then it's probably needed in the work.
Yeah, and I mean, since you bring up, I mean, I wasn't going to ask this at all. I hadn't even thought of this. But since you bring up, like, you should dance like nobody's watching, and you should dance like there's no technique involved, and to just bring out your inner self. Do you believe in good dancers and bad dancers?
Ooh, loaded. Okay, I have to admit that for a long time I did.
Okay.
And again, it's something that I had to work my way out of because I believed it. I believed there was such a thing as a good dancer and a bad dancer.
Mm-hmm.
I used to believe that a perfectly pointed foot was the be all and end all. You know, I used to believe certain lines and certain aesthetics were preferable over others. So that is something have been working hard to eliminate in my thought process. So when I go see work, I no longer think of that, or think of or critique it in that form, in that way, in that fashion.
Right.
I no longer believe that there's good and bad dancers. I now believe that there's just different ways of moving. Another reason I shed that mentality was because I myself didn't start moving until I was 19 years old when I was at UC Santa Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
My first actual technique class, modern technique class, let me be clear about that. Modern technique class was at UC Santa Cruz.
Right.
And I had a lot of catching up to do to my contemporaries when I realized, like, I really enjoy this. I had tons of catching up to do. And then I moved into the professional world and I had tons of catching up to do. And I was taking tons of classes just to like catch up. So what I recognized again was the disparity of somebody who had the privilege and the positionality to have had their parents provide them with this background from being super young, versus somebody like me whose parents could not afford something like this. I do remember asking my parents when I was in middle school, when I told them for the first time, I want to go into the performing arts. I went to a school called Bancroft Junior High School in Hollywood, which has a performing arts magnet program.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't part of the magnet program. I just happened to go to that school because it was my local school. But I was lucky enough to see it take shape and be around me.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember telling them, and they being immigrants and day laborers and whatnot, and they couldn't see that as a reality, and also they couldn't afford it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I think a lot of times what we do as choreographers, especially a lot of us in the professional field, is we forget that there's disparity and access to the arts for a lot of people, and particularly POCs and low income communities.
Mm-hmm.
And then we judge them for it.
Right.
Then we think, oh, well, they're not up to par. They're just not as good. It would be great to have them, but they're just not as good.
Mm-hmm.
When in reality, they have just as much to contribute to a piece of work. And if we eliminate that aesthetic and that idealism of what it should look like, once we start to look at the person and what they can actually bring in terms of just movement and organic movement, then I think we start getting into a much richer conversation within the dance field. So I do think we have a long way to go with that, with the established dance field. I do tell younger choreographers now to look at all the possibility of movement that's not embedded in this train of thought that that I felt prey to myself. And I do push for the acknowledgement that access has a lot to do with this, but not having access does not mean you're not good.
You definitely have a very distinct background in performance and the entertainment industry. So for whoever is watching this, or whoever might be interested in making a living in performance or production, what advice do you have for them? And thinking about that, and like if you can derive that advice from something that this field has taught you monumentally.
Oh, wow. Okay. So first off, I would say do not pursue this if you're not okay with the struggle. Just being very real here. If you're not okay with the struggle of survival, this might not be the field for you. There has to be passion, self-determination, and drive in this, and then there's so many other things that try to like block you from climbing. But if you really passionately believe in this, then by all means do it. With that said, I would look to programs or programming where you can come in and like have a mentorship program or a networking program. Don't do it for free. I am also a believer now, don't do something fully for free. Don't be an intern for somebody for 6 months and get no payment out of it or stipend or anything like that. So I would recommend starting to reach out to people that you do know. So for instance, for those people still in the university, you're going to graduate eventually. Use the people that you know through the university. I'm still connected to a lot of people I went to school with, actually, and many of them are actually, my in-house lighting designer was a student at UC Santa Cruz, a couple of years under my class. And he came through. I used to have another lighting designer, Megan Badix, who was in my class, and when she left to pursue her grad degree and all that, and now she's a professor, I think, in Florida somewhere. When she left the company, she recommended Ray Oppenheimer, who is now also teaching at UCSF. And then also I had a theater director. I was the artistic director, but then I had a theatrical director in my company from someone who also went to school with me a year above me. Right. And then so start putting out your feelings through people that you know. Then so-and-so has recommended this person and that person, so on and so forth. That's your first outreach. That's your first network. From there, I would say start putting yourself out there. And that sounds really cliche. You hear this a lot. Yeah. But really do it. Go to the classes, go to the shows, and start introducing yourself to people. Start talking to people. Start telling them what you're interested in doing and how you're interested in getting there. and if they're willing to help you in any capacity. Are they willing to be an advisor? Are they willing to listen to your idea or your pitch? Are they willing to help you write your first grant? And that's extremely important, by the way. You'll be surprised how many people say yes. And don't be discouraged by the people that say no. Also, here, and this is something big, and this is something I believed from the get-go. Allow yourself the opportunity to fail, and fail big. People are scared of that word, but I think failing at something is only a trial of something that you're eventually going to reach if you continue trying it.
Right.
And if you learn from it, obviously don't repeat the same process, change it and see what works and doesn't work. And that's really how I did my company. I kept pushing for things. I kept trying things out. Some things worked out, some things didn't. Sometimes I lost a lot of money. Sometimes I made more money. Some people backed out of production, things like that. So just try it out and be okay with knowing that not everything's going to go as planned. And usually it's not. And usually it doesn't, and not everything's going to turn out how you wish it would have turned out.
For sure.
And that goes with even people you're interested in working with. You know that old saying, like, never meet your heroes.
Yeah.
It's true a lot of the times. So that's a lot of the advice I think is crucial. The networking, I think it's the biggest one. I now have with my company, I now have a mentorship program called Latin Extensions for young choreographers and young dance artists. And the program it's a 12-month program, so a full year, in which really they get to talk to me and I get to talk to them about everything that I've learned in the field so that they don't have to repeat it or go through it. But also to answer questions for them specifically, like what they're interested in doing and how to achieve it. And one of the biggest aspects I keep harping on them is the networking aspect.
Right.
Once you start to create community, you don't feel as alone when you think, oh my gosh, I'm never going to accomplish this. I'm never going to make this happen. Like I did it on my own. And for many years, I felt like there was nobody else going through. But once I started to create that community for myself, then that's when I thought, okay, no, there's actually something here. So build that community, build that insulation, build somebody you can like commiserate with, but also share your growth with, because that's just as important. Grant writing sucks. I still hate it. But something I did not do when I was younger, which I wish somebody would have prescribed me to do and pushed me to do, was practice writing grants.
Right.
And practice sharing those grants with other people so that they can give you feedback.
Right.
It's so important, and the writing aspect I still have a lot of issues with, because grant writing I still believe has a lot of problems with structure in itself and the way things are written. The demands that they ask, are still very, in my opinion, are still very racialized.
Right. Right.
And what's considered good writing versus what's considered not so good writing. But it is important that you practice it in a way so that you learn how to talk about your work. I was passionate for such a long time and I didn't know how to talk about my work. I just wanted people to understand my passion.
Right.
So it did take practice to finally start getting a hang of it. And even now, I mean, the rejections of grants are a common thing. It happens over and over and over, but keep doing it. Eventually you will be granted. I think, those are some of my big ones.
Thank you so much for being so candid, for being, for giving out full-fledged responses. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to all of us.
Of course, it's my pleasure. And then also I want to put this out there that if anybody is interested in reaching out, please feel free to send me an email, dh@dhperformance.org, because I am open to communicating with somebody who is interested in hearing more or wanting, or if somebody has specific questions, and if I can help answer that, then it would be my pleasure. I don't believe in hoarding resources. I believe in sharing any resource that I have gained for the community, and making it a little bit richer and make it truly diverse.